Hello and welcome to Counterpressed on The Ringer and Spotify. I'm in the studio with Jessy Parker Humphreys and special guest Tim Stillman from Arseblog. On today's show, we talk about the Champions League as all three English teams have booked their place in the knockout stages. We'll also get stuck into a special Arsenal mailbag with Tim. Tim, so glad to have you with us. I feel like it's a long overdue Tim Stillman Counterpress appearance. Both Jessy and I have come on the Arseblog podcast separately as a bit of a
You made it sound like we requested that.
No, but I
separate
think
riders, separate dressing rooms.
I feel like they were both the sort of like media download episodes.
I normally am recruited to talk
you did
about,
a Chelsea one?
to be set up to talk about Chelsea.
I think mine was, did we do it early this year or was it this time last year?
It was about this time last year.
Yeah, it was a sort of winter break one, and it was a bit of sort of talking about the wider women's football media landscape. Well, yours was a Chelsea preview or a debrief?
I normally do previews.
Right.
And then everything I say goes out the window.
And then you jinx yourself.
Yeah.
I also have to tell you guys about an insane Arsenal-related dream.
Oh my God,
I've
I've heard this. And Flo texted this to me while I was in an editorial meeting at work, and I actually involuntarily laughed out loud when I read it.
So, as people might be able to tell and hear, I've got a bit of a cold, as has the rest of the UK and the world right now. 'Tis the season. So on Tuesday night, obviously watched Arsenal 20 in Champions League. And often when I'm not very well, I might have this quite intense drowsy cough syrup. Handle with care, always read the label, etc. It's one of those ones that's only available over the counter. So it's pretty spicy stuff, okay? So I took a little bit of that. It makes you super drowsy. And sometimes it makes your dreams go a little bit wacky. So the whole night, I was sort of in and out of sleep. And I was having this persistent, really vivid dream that Renee Sleggers was on the sidelines and she was distracted from the game because she was trying to buy on Amazon this special K-pop Demon Hunters, like limited edition product. And this dream was just going round and round and round. And it was so vivid that I woke up in the morning, I thought, I'm going to have to write about this because this is like, how has this happened? How has Renee ended up so distracted from this match? And then it was only sort of after I sort of came to and wore away the drowsiness that I realised that in fact wasn't true and it was just a really intense dream. And needless to say, last night I opted not to have the cough syrup because I wanted to be at my best.
I want to know what Sonia Bompastor was buying.
Yeah, that would have been the next one.
I'm definitely going to have that dream now, not least because my daughter, I have a 5-year-old daughter and she is obsessed with K-pop Demon Hunters. And not only that, she watches it dubbed in Portuguese, which makes it even weirder to watch. So like, I'm actually surprised I haven't had some kind of fever dream involving K-pop Demon Hunters, but I think you've planted the seed now.
Well, I'd never heard of this thing until People's Spotify Wrapped came out, and
my nephew loves it.
Was
my nephew loves it, but he only knows the music because the actual show's a bit too scary for him. He's only 3, so he's not of the right age. But the reason
made it sound like you.
For me,
it's too scary.
My daughter watches the film. But I only.
But the reason it was in my head is because on Instagram it came up that they were one of Time's most important people of the year, the K-pop Demon Hunters.
Wow.
So it was like Aja Wilson, and WNBA player, and like K-pop Demon Hunters, one of the covers, and a few others. So I'd obviously just seen that on my Instagram feed, and then that had kind of combined with this mad Renee Sleggers Arsenal dream.
And this is my first experience as a parent of like something being big at my daughter's school.
Yeah.
That if I didn't have a child, I would have absolutely no idea about. But now, like, it's the first like trend I think I've been exposed to as a parent.
Has she got? Is she getting all the merch for Christmas?
She got the limited edition.
I hope she doesn't listen. It's Father Christmas getting for you, not Tim.
My mum has bought her some of the dolls. Yes.
Wow.
Cute.
It's gonna be a good Christmas. It's gonna be a good Christmas for her. Okay, and listener, viewer, if you want to unpack my dream and analyse it and what it means for Sleggers, Arsenal, or me, please do let me know. But let's get into some actual football stuff. Let's start with the games that happened on Wednesday night. Chelsea and Manchester United were in action. We'll talk about that after this. So we'll start with Chelsea, Jessy, because you were at Stamford Bridge. A very comfortable finish, 6-0 in the end for Chelsea. And off the back of that defeat at the weekend, I feel like there was a little bit of maybe tension around what sort of Chelsea performance we'll see, how they might react. They're probably blessed with the fact that Roma have had a very stinky Champions League so far, so it was probably quite a nice way to try and bounce back. But we saw a much changed, again, Sonia Bonpastor team, because she just keeps wanting to rotate, prove a point, do something. But again, we saw lots of changes, but they get the job done and they become yet the latest team to secure a knockout berth.
Yeah, I don't know if, I mean, I'm sure some people will know, but Chelsea men lost to Atalanta on Tuesday night in the Champions League, and Simon Johnson of The Athletic did a piece basically saying Enzo Maresca rotates too much and this is why, you know, Chelsea's results are so patchy. And then I was just like, it's incredible, this like sort of one club mentality. But yes, Sonia made 6 changes, but kind of can't fault them. Yeah, some stuff I think fairly predictable things, like, you know, having Sam Kerr start. Vika Kaptein probably would have started at the weekend, I think, if she hadn't sort of had a knock over the international break. So this is sometimes the thing with Sonia's rotations. I'm like, you can kind of often find the logic behind them, but then sometimes you're like, oh, why is this player here? Why was that player there? But yeah, Rome were really poor. But I do feel like Chelsea in the Champions League feel like a very different team to Chelsea in the WSL. I don't know whether it's feeling like this because they are now so far behind City that it is logical for them to concentrate on the Champions League. But even throughout the season, I do wonder if there's a bit of a sense of, and I think we did have this in Emma Hayes' seasons in the past a little bit, but maybe it feels particularly extreme this year because they have dropped points so much already. But whether there is just a bit of a sense of, yeah, we like, this is really what we're thinking about, and actually it is all the midweeks. And I know we'll come on to talk about Manchester United, but that's almost funny because that kind of feels like maybe that's the opposite of what they've got going on there. But yeah, I mean, the first goal was also exactly, if you've struggled to score, it's exactly the kind of goal you want to go in. Because obviously the cross comes in, Sam Kerr misses the header, but fortunately there's a Roma player just behind her for it to put the perfect header in. My favourite kind of own goal where it really looks like they've tried to score. And it felt like from there, yeah, I mean, Chelsea just blew them away. They were able to take Walsh off at half-time. Lexi Potter came on, she looked great. It was basically the ideal night.
I just want to talk about the rotations a little bit more, because there was an episode earlier this season, I can't remember at what point it was, where we talked a lot about the rotations and the pros and cons, and the fact that I think it was actually in the context of Renee Slegers being resistant to rotating some of her older players, and Sonia Bonpastor going for the other option was rotate. And Chelsea were getting good results, so it was hard to sort of unpack the potential flaws in it. But now it feels like the narrative is maybe changing a little bit, where you're seeing the fact that you rotate too much and you do impact the rhythm, the patterns of play, the chemistry between players. And some of those rotations are forced. Natalie Blyon's still out. Erin Cuthbert's been out since the international break, and she's a very reliable, important player and a very core part of that midfield. But it does feel like Chelsea are maybe a little bit disrupted from rotations that are necessary and rotations that are there to get some players more minutes or also play people into form.
Listen, it's very hard in football, I think, sometimes to take away your analysis from the results. And like, rotation always feels like such a classic one for this. Like you said, if you rotate and the team's doing well, everyone's like, this is genius, everyone's getting minutes, la 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 la. If you rotate and the team isn't doing well, everyone's like, well, it's because you're rotating. I think you can have like a little bit of both. I generally think especially with rotation and players getting minutes sort of in the first half of the season, sometimes you can really only judge it by how the second half of the season looks, because I think a lot of the time when you're talking about trying to build chemistry between different players, like, you're not necessarily going to see it pay off until you get into the latter stages of the season, but then it has the opportunity to pay off. So sometimes I think kind of what you're trying to do is sort of ride by the seat of your pants as much as possible when that chemistry isn't there. I do think you can look at Chelsea at points and say, well, maybe this is just a little bit too much. But I kind of have to give like respect to Bonpastor for still sticking with it, because I think it would have been really easy after the Everton loss to be like, well, I'm going to like try and, you know, have these combinations which maybe are a bit more familiar. I do think some of it's been overstated. Like, I was having a look at the amount of minutes, City, United, Arsenal and Chelsea players have played and sort of how consistent they've been. And in terms of Chelsea, there's been a lot of rotation in attack, and obviously that's kind of where the problems have laid. But as you say, there's been like quite a few different factors there, and I still think I could tell you what Bompastor's like ideal 11 was. But like, for example, in terms of like Chelsea do have fewer players who've played sort of like 80% of minutes. But let's, for example, like Hannah Hampton was up there, but now she's not, obviously because she's been injured. Millie Bright was up there, but now she's not because she's been dropped out of the team. So like, Lucy Bronze would be up there if she hadn't started the season not fit. So I don't know. I do think some of the analysis has been like very results driven as opposed to like process driven. But I do understand why, especially I think in attack, there's this feeling that like the connections between players aren't there.
And Lucy Bronze is the kind of player that once she's back in the team, she makes it kind of impossible for her to be rotated because she refuses. Sorry, Tim, you jump in.
No, I was going to say, I think you made 2 points there that are really spot on. First of all, in like a successful season, once it gets to about March, April, you find out what, quote unquote, the team is. So using Arsenal's Champions League success, I have to bring that up at some point, sorry, last year. Like, by the time it got to the semi-final and the final, everyone's predicted lineup and predicted substitutions were spot on. And that can be a weakness when you lose. But I think generally when you get to the business end, you fall on the team. I think also like an outside perspective for me with Chelsea is like, actually there's quite a lot of pillar players they're having to move away from. So Millie Bright's one, who's been in that team forever and played almost every minute of every game. The kind of, I guess, transition away from Sam Kerr or Sam Kerr becoming a different type of player. Those things really make a difference to a team, I think. And that's coming for Arsenal as well at some point. Like when you lose or those pillar players become slightly less important or their role reduces, I guess this is a long way of saying I think Chelsea are maybe in a bit of transition squad-wise, and it will probably settle down in a year or so.
And I also think with that transition, it's quite funny to be in this position because I think if this had happened last season, and I think everyone knows that Chelsea have needed to move towards this, and you've seen Chelsea really go after a lot of younger players, I think, as a result. And, I think when you're looking at players like Captain Thompson coming in and, playing a lot of minutes, that you're like, okay, well, it feels obvious that these are players who could come in and play for the next 4 or 5, if not longer seasons for Chelsea, and that's a good thing. I almost feel like if this kind of, what Chelsea have gone on this sort of 5-6 game run, let's say, where they've not looked very good and they've scraped some results, they've lost out in others. If that happened last year, everyone would have been like, Bompastor's coming in, she's refreshing the squad, it's to be expected. But it feels like, and I can understand some Chelsea fans, I think, watching Bompastor's Lyon team, which did go stale, are worried because of that. And I think that's a valid worry. But I do think if this happened last year, people have been like, that's to be expected. But because everything last year went really well, Champions League aside, there's now that expectation is there that that's what you want. But it's like, well, maybe that process is still sort of ongoing, and maybe there were some results last year that masked it. There was, trophy success that masked that as well. And now we're actually getting into the weeds of that team being in transition.
Yeah, I think that plus injuries having to manage, plus the fact that you signed Naomi Girma, but she has struggled to find that really good run of fitness until now.
Look at Walsh and like the role Walsh is, Walsh is the only player I think who's played every minute in the WSL for Chelsea. That might be a concern in itself, but obviously if she can stay fit, that's fine. She comes in at the same time as Girma. I think in an ideal world, again, Girma would also be that player, but it hasn't worked out. And that's football. Sometimes it doesn't work out like that.
And then again, I think someone like Aggie Beaver-Jones starts the season on a hot streak. Then it kind of dries up a bit. She had a bit of a niggle at 1.2. Then you're kind of managing that.
And that's having a 22-year-old starting striker.
I think there are factors which are a lot of squad issues rather than tactical decisions as well, which I think come into it. Someone I want to talk about because she was kind of on the outs a little bit, but maybe we're seeing her come back into the fold is Sjuskan Jessy, who scored last night. She came on in the game against Everton, but, that was... she couldn't really impact the game. But she's a player that does make stuff happen, but we've seen this season, and she's had a niggle as well at one point, Bompastor not look to her as the player that she has been in the past for Chelsea. is what she did last night a way to kind of remind Bonpastor that she exists and she should be an option?
I don't get the impression that Bonpastor thinks very highly of Nuskin.
She signed in a 1-year extension, didn't she, earlier this season? Or was it end of last year?
Yes, a 1-year extension.
Yeah.
I think she's a childhood Bayern fan, and there's sort of been some flirting between the two, it feels like. I think we've obviously just talked about squad stuff. The thing that Bonpastor does that I really don't get is the Macario in midfield thing, because I just think physically she does not look like she's up to that task. And given, as we've said, that Beaver Jones hasn't been in great form, I'd kind of prefer, if you're going to use Macario, to see her just as the 9. I also think Macario is a player who feels like she's been quite frustrating at Chelsea, and there have been points where I've thought she's going to kick on, like the FA Cup final last season, and it just feels like it's not quite happened. But, you know, she's scoring a lot for the US, so, you know, playing as a 9, so it does feel like maybe this is just someone you should push forward. And then when Nuskin's playing kind of more in that role, it does feel a bit more like Chelsea are, one, a bit more defensively robust, because I think that's the thing, like Macario just looks too easily bundled off the ball sometimes. But Bonpastor is quite obsessed, I think, with having a more technical midfield. And I do think Nuskin feels like such an Emma Hayes midfielder, you know, in this real, like, sort of somewhat head-lossy way, but quite effective. Like, I'm going to run around, I'm going to win my duels, I'm going to get my tackles, I'm going to crash the box. And she is a bit of an XG magnet, but it's like Vika Kaptein's kind of taken that role. I understand why Bonpastor maybe wants to pair someone like Kaptein with a more technical midfielder. I personally don't think that's Macario in this role. I can also see why it's maybe not Nuskin. And obviously if Erin Cuthbert's fit, that's what I mean when I say I feel like I know a lot of what Bonpastor's first choice 11 is. I think the midfield is Walsh, Cuthbert, Kaptein, and I kind of think that's pretty well balanced. I
think for me, I think Nuskin is such a talent, and I will add her to my free Jenna Niceswanger list.
Unless it's not that extreme.
Of captive footballers who should be freed.
Who's Jenna?
Never heard of her.
Niceswanger? I'm not familiar with that name.
Because it's because the thing about Bonpastor's rotation is like everyone kind of has the chance of getting a game. Nuskin's the only player who was really on the outs, and obviously Everton. And this game, we see that she can still get minutes, but it feels reluctant rather than someone who is part of the wider rotation plans. And I think it's a shame for someone who I think has a lot that they can do on the pitch, and perhaps January is the window for her to find a team where she can influence. Because we see her starting for Germany.
I don't think. I personally would find it hard from that starting midfield to argue that Nuskin should start over any of those 3. I would agree. I'd probably like to see her come off the bench sooner at different points. So if she wants to start, I just don't see how that's going to be at Chelsea.
That's what I mean. That's why I think perhaps January.
But I don't think that's with those 3 players. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing.
No, and the squad dynamics change, but it does feel like. It feels like wasted talent for me that if she should move on to find somewhere, because she would start in a lot of other teams.
I mean, Bayern are going to lose Georgia Stanway.
Yeah.
Basically.
It feels like quite
very
obvious.
Telegraphed.
Yeah. And I think also this is another thing when you're talking about the transition thing. Like, I mean, it's kind of crazy. Like, CO is obviously like 25, I think. So like she's pretty young as well, and like coming into her prime years. But equally, like when you've got Kaptein who's 19. And again, I think those two are maybe a little bit interchangeable for me. Like if Nuskin was going to replace someone, it's probably Kaptein. And I think it's hard I think they've both got slightly different skill sets where maybe one's ahead of the other and one's not. But when you've got a 19-year-old player who's playing at the same level-ish as a 25-year-old player, I'm like, well, I can see why you carry on pushing the 19-year-old one. And maybe you can flip CEO, because Chelsea play quite a lot for her, but I think she's had a pretty good run of things.
Let's talk about Manchester United. They had already secured their place in the knockout rounds, but they lost to Lyon 3-0. This was, on paper, their hardest game of the league phase. And Mark Skinner, I think, sort of reflected this in his team selection. Not that he put his best team out there, but I don't want to call it a concession because that's not fair, because every manager plays to win the game. But it does seem like he made changes with one eye on making sure that they don't lose too much ground in the league, especially when it comes to holding on to a Champions League spot, and also resting players who've played a lot of football. So we saw Gabby George, we saw Rachel Williams start against Lyon in the Champions League, which is kind of incredible in itself. Simi Awuju, Miyazawa, and Elise Narsland. So those were probably the biggest changes that speak of not what is Mark Skinner's sort of like go-to first 11. Actually, there was a bulk of the game until Lyon's second went in where they weren't really creating anything, but they weren't just rolling over. And then once that great Melky Dumine goal goes in, she then scores again, they get their third, and now the game looks very different. But 1-0, Mark Skinner probably would have actually been quite happy with what happened. The only real chance for them was a Melvin Mallard header that went over the bar. Apart from that, not a lot to write home about. Tim, talking about United more broadly in the Champions League, because I don't think we can take loads from this game. They kind of front-loaded their start by getting those good results. Not amazing performances, but got the good results to put them in a very good position. They get that win against PSG, who've had a completely stinky league phase and are out of it. But all in all, actually, in this conversation about how United would take to this competition, not necessarily cope, because that's a different question with that squad, they've done pretty well to, not a lot of teams are being knocked out at this stage, but to have the league phase and that place already secured like they did in the last match week is pretty impressive.
Yeah, they kind of gamified this a little bit, and I think like PSG being absolutely awful was a real help, because on paper that's probably one of your, do we get 3 points or 1 point here? But this year that's one of the most obvious 3 points you get in the group phase. So they put themselves in a position almost to kind of throw this away. And he makes changes at half time as well, which I think was probably pre-planned as well. But I kind of think this is the position the club have put him in with the recruitment as well. I am a bit of a Mark Skinner sympathiser because he's very nice to journalists, and that always helps. But
that's the way to buy Tim's approval.
Exactly. But I kind of felt like there was almost a bit of a message there, almost, that like, we've got Tottenham this weekend. That's going to be a really difficult game. Actually, Tottenham are very close to United in the league as well. And actually, we probably have to prioritise that. I think there is a bit of a danger with it sometimes that some of those players like Ella Toone, Jess Park that are on the bench, these are the games you really want to play. And if you're Jess Park, probably a big part of the reason you've come to United, other than expediency, is like Champions League, playing Lyon, and when you get left out of a game like that, there's probably a small risk that players are like, this is kind of what I really wanted. But to be honest, I think they've done enough good work. They've also been in the qualifying rounds as well, so there's a lot, there's a lot of empty tanks there, I think, and I really understand what they did. And I think Mark Skinner referred to De Mornay as a cheat code afterwards as well, which I think is fair enough, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Lyon's squad on paper, it's absolutely ridiculous in terms of the ability they have, the depth
They're
as
so
well.
powerful as well, and if you're a bit underpowered, they will punish you for that.
In that first half especially, it felt like Man United were clinging on for dear life a little bit, with lots of sort of sliding challenges and blocks, and Fallon Tulloch-Joy sort of like jumping around everywhere to try and stop a bit of a barrage of opportunities. Jessy, in general, I mean, it's going to be a busy January transfer window for Manchester United, so that's probably what Skinner can at least look to, is there are some potential reinforcements on the way. The issue, I think, for United is the players they want, lots of other teams also want, so there is a bit of competition. It's not as if they are the favourites to secure all this talent. Signo Galpset, who Spurs got, a player that United really wanted, but that relationship with Martin Ho was very strong, so that's already a name that they've kind of lost out on. But having the ability to say to players, come in January and you can be part of the Champions League knockout stages, is a pretty good sell as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I think to Tim's point, I agree, for Park and Toone, you're like, they probably do much more excited to play this game than they are to play Spurs, but that's kind of the position United put themselves in. They already knew they had extra Champions League games coming. So, at least for those players, you're like, well, it's not like I'm missing out and we're also going to go out in the group stage. I mean, just to emphasise sort of where United's squad probably is, I would argue that Lyon also played a weakened team in that Diani and Katoto came off the bench. It's just that they got to start Hegerberg and Euler Brand. And I think that just shows you, like, the different levels. But I don't, I wouldn't say they're their first choice players. I mean, for example, when they played Arsenal, they started Katoto and Diani, and I think that tells you, like, the difference in the where they view those games at as well. And Turlin wasn't available, so I kind of see why you are going to start Rachel Williams. So yeah, I agree with Tim. I do think this is kind of a bit the position that Skinner has been left in, and I think the thing that's a little bit funny as well, but again, I kind of understand this, is like the Tottenham game can sort of feel like this slightly meaningless game, but obviously, like, in recent years, Tottenham and United have kind of had this, like, little beef. There was, like, obviously the Bizet and the Clinton things, the Bizet one obviously being more annoying. They obviously played an FA Cup final against each other. Martin Ho is obviously now at Tottenham, who was formerly at United, and Tottenham have taken a couple of other United backroom staff as well, kind of as part of that. So there is also this sense of, like, that game on Sunday isn't just like another WSL game. It's a game that United and Skinner really care about. Now, you can argue whether that's a little bit tin pot, but I do feel like Skinner is the kind of man who does really care about that kind of stuff, for better or for worse. So
it's funny because we had this very similar conversation, but in a reverse way, because after the PSG game, where United very much played their best team to win that game, they then ended up losing to Villa, and the conversation was, what's the risk of putting everything in the Champions League? Now, maybe they could have actually got away with, because it was PSG, in retrospect, perhaps not starting some of the players that they did, but you don't know that until you realise PSG are having an absolute disaster. So it's interesting to see now this reverse scenario play out, but that is because they got the work done early on and they can then make that change.
Yeah, and I think also what you're saying about being able to go out in January, being able to go out in the summer, if they are going to maybe get some more money put into them, and I think United are like, they're obviously not a Liverpool, like they do put something behind it. It's just they are further behind than Chelsea, Arsenal and City. I think, something City have clearly struggled with over the years is the yo-yoing in and out of the Champions League does make it harder to attract players, because you can't offer them that. And I think the reality is all teams in England are probably going to have an advantage over, say, other teams in Europe, because they do pay more, or the WSL is a really attractive league. Players are still going to want to come regardless, and you're going to get a shot at the like City was still able to get Caroline, for example. Like, I don't think it's a total barrier, and probably any team in the WSL is going to have that issue that you're not a Real Madrid, say, where you can basically be like, yeah, okay, we're probably not going to win Liga FA, but we're going to come second every single year. So you will get Champions League football every single year. But, when you are like, they're in third, Arsenal are a point behind, Spurs are a point behind, it's like, well, yeah, securing Champions League football for next year is almost as important as your Champions League run.
And lots of people laughed at the start of the season when Skinner was straight away facing conversations about squad depth, and he was referring to the January window already, and people were saying, oh, well, the January window might not matter if you're not in the next stage of the Champions League. Well, hey, they are in the next stage of the Champions League, so now the January transfer window does matter, and it matters a lot, because I think it's unlikely they'll get top four, or can they even get top four? I don't think they can. United.
I think the
Maybe
permutations are making my brain hurt. I don't know what the implications of other teams' games are, but like mathematically, yes, they could.
But I think
probably
it's unlikely.
Won't.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
exactly. Currently, the team in fourth has 10 points, and United have 9 points. But other teams are going to pick up points,
Well, before we move on to Arsenal, I'll just quickly round up then the teams that have qualified. Chelsea, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Manchester United, Wolfsburg, Lyon, Juventus, who've had a good campaign so far, and Paris FC. And so that means in our final league phase games next week, there are 2 places up for grabs to still make it out of the league phase. And also, it needs to be determined who are the 4 teams who will automatically go through to the quarterfinals, so they won't have to play that playoff game, which is a bit of a luxury. But that, Jessy, is a bit more complicated because there are a lot more permutation. That's kind of the main fun, I guess, to be decided thing is who's going to finish in that top 4.
Yeah, and we were talking last night. I mean, it's very confusing, but it does feel exciting because I was kind of watching Chelsea trounce Roma 6-0, and I was thinking, like, in another world, like, this would all be sort of done and dusted, but kind of, you know, if this was like a group stage thing. But, you know, Chelsea still have to go to Wolfsburg, and they have to get a result. Like, they really have to win, and that's quite fun, obviously, because Chelsea had to go to Wolfsburg once before in a Champions League group stage and get a result, and then
Crack
everyone
out the
got...
Imodium
yeah, exactly. Please, someone pack that.
There is some big PTSD there.
Yeah,
but
there's
you
some
would
good
say...
history there. So Barcelona, I think, will certainly because of their goal difference.
Yeah.
Chelsea could be in a good position because their goal difference is even better than Barcelona's. And the underlying numbers are better as well.
Because Juve's goal difference isn't miles away from Lyon's. They're 3 behind. If Juve win and there's a goal swing, they could potentially replace Lyon, but
I can't do anything more than Barcelona are certainly in the top 4, and I know that if Chelsea win, they'll be in the top 4. That's as far as my analysis goes.
Juve have Manchester United, whereas Lyon have Atletico Madrid. So neither of them are easy games, actually.
For me, it's all kind of pointing towards Leo Valti winning the Champions League in 2026, and that's perfectly fine with me.
Tim will accept that. Okay, let's talk all things Arsenal. We'll get into that next. So Arsenal beat 1-0 on Tuesday night. The Jill Roord revenge game didn't quite unravel maybe the way that she would have liked and 20 would have liked. And Tim, it was important because it meant that Arsenal secured their place in the knockout stage. And we're going to get on to their season more broadly, but this Champions League campaign has been a bit of an up and down roller coaster affair. So even after the late winner on the weekend, this game, even though they could have probably put it to bed and got a bigger lead and a bigger win, it was very much a job done, let's breathe again for a few days.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's difficult to know what to expect from this game. I think Renée kind of alluded to that herself because a part of Arsenal's game plan was to be really intense in the press, right? They're playing on a much smaller pitch at Meadow Park. I think they tried to use that to their advantage, to take a lot of risks playing out from the back. But she was kind of talking about it's difficult to watch them in Eredivisie games and really work out what to do because obviously they play completely differently in Europe, and they've played 4 Champions League games coming into this, so it's a bit like that there is still an element of the slightly unexpected. I think in the normal run of things, this is probably a 3-0 game that ended 1-0. It does feel like Arsenal have quite a lot of games like that though, so it's difficult to know how much to take it in isolation as well. And they did a little bit of rotation as well. I think they had some subs planned, which they couldn't do because goalkeeper went down and they had to save a sub just in case they had to put 17-year-old in goal. So it was quite a weird game in that respect. I think in isolation, you kind of look at it and go, it was 1-0, it should have been 3-0, that's fine. But like I said, at the moment, when you're in a bit of a knotty place, it's always difficult to know how much to take games in isolation or how much you're always looking at the wider picture all of the time, and it's difficult to kind of see the wood from the trees a little bit.
I will say as well, a 20 goalkeeper Lemme had a blinder. She kept her side in it. They didn't really create a whole lot, but Jessy, obviously there was a bit of a tough game for Chelsea against Twente early this season. Mm-hmm. What's your read of them? Off the back of that, were you maybe expecting a little bit more, or was that more of a game where you just felt like Chelsea should have done better? Because I thought Twente were really good in that game against Chelsea. Yeah,
although I think I would say I kind of felt like the 2 games were quite similar. It's just Twente obviously against Chelsea scored a bit of a screamer.
There were a couple of other chances that came their way.
I thought they were better in transition against Chelsea, or Chelsea were worse at defending transitions, whichever way you look at it, than I thought they were in this game. But I did feel like Chelsea should have done better in that game in terms of some of the turnovers they were able to generate from the way that Twente played, which is something that Arsenal well, Arsenal, I guess similar to Chelsea, didn't really benefit from that because they also only scored 1 goal. So I mean, I think in both games it felt like Twente were a team who really knew what they wanted to do, and even if that at points didn't necessarily seem like the most logical thing in the world, sometimes I feel like teams in the Champions League can get, or like worse teams in the Champions League can kind of get caught between a couple of different ideas, and that's almost where the problems come out. But I definitely felt like against Chelsea it was like Twente had a really clear plan of what they wanted to do, and they sort of rode their luck a bit, and they were able to then get a result. I felt like in this Arsenal game they probably also rode their luck a bit, but there was like one moment, wasn't there, where like they sort of like randomly had a chance out of nowhere. But yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of, this is what's been a bit funny about this Champions League, and you know, Chelsea haven't played Leuven and Arsenal have Leuven last, and they're kind of a team who maybe sort of exemplifies this, but we're kind of in a position where maybe there's been some of the lesser teams have actually been sort of better, whether that's because they, I mean, Twente aren't a surprise for Chelsea because obviously they played them last year as well, but you know, whether it's like that they see this as a different opportunity, but it's like it's been PSG and Roma and teams who are like far more established in Europe who felt like the teams are way more easy to get through than some of these smaller teams where, you know, you saw it with United against Vålerenga, for example, that was like a tough match for them. And Vålerenga, I guess, also a little bit more established in that they have played in the Champions League on several occasions. But it's kind of been an interesting thing that I don't know how much of it is just the teams this year or whether this is the new format. But I think especially for bigger teams against smaller teams in the group stages, the fact that you played them twice, it felt like even if on that first occasion maybe there were things that were a bit hard to figure out, by the time you get to the second time, you really know what you're doing. And I think because of this, because you only get the one go, that it only takes like a team to surprise you a little bit, that suddenly sort of the game's gone for you, and you know, you might still get the 1-0 win, but you might have, like what Chelsea happened.
When I was looking yesterday, because I did, until Chelsea won 6-0 last night, I was kind of coming prepared with the point that actually you haven't seen as many big scores in the group stage this year. And actually, like, if you'd have given me the fixtures before and told me to pick out the 5 and 6-0s, I would not have picked like Bayern against Barca to get done 7-1. I wouldn't have picked Roma to get done 6-0. And then some of the kind of teams, like Leuven, like and Twente, they haven't been done by those scorelines.
Benfica as well, you know, I mean, they also rode their luck a little bit, I think, against Barcelona last time. Barcelona did eventually win 3-1, but you know, like that's like again another one where you feel like, oh, but it definitely, I think, has felt like it's a little bit, and maybe it's those. It is because those teams have, I mean, I can't remember Chelsea playing Roma, so maybe this is a silly example, but Bayern and Barcelona have played each other quite a lot in the Champions League as well. So maybe, again, if you do have a better sense of what those teams are and how you want to play against them, that actually is kind of helping out and contributing to those scorelines.
Let's talk a bit more broadly about Arsenal's season so far, Tim, because it's been a very up and down, tough one. Worst start to a WSL season in a very long time. Won 5 of their first 10 games. Obviously lost 2 games in the Champions League, albeit, like, you know, a game against Lyon, a game against Bayern, not the easiest seeded teams in their league phase. But it's been a bit of a concern given how last season finished on this huge high. What are some of the factors that you think have contributed to what has been a bit of a disappointing start to the campaign?
I think Arsenal winning the Champions League in May, I think if you'd asked a lot of Arsenal fans, felt like the end of something rather than the beginning of something, just because of the age of the overall squad, right? And you kind of think, okay, this is a really good bookmark to go and do some renewal, which I don't think Arsenal did. I also think that a lot of WSL managers, and maybe there's a question about Sonia Bonpastor in here as well, get into this kind of thing where a new manager comes in, they do something really different. We're seeing it with Man City and Spurs, I think, at the moment, who are 2 of probably the best performing teams in the WSL at the moment. And they come in, they do something new. Not everyone knows what they're going to do. It's a bit of a surprise. And then like a year passes and everyone kind of understands what you're doing. It happened to Arsenal under Jonas Eidevall. Their best league season was his first. Everyone works it out. Then do you have the answer? And it feels a little bit like René's come to that inflection point, because Arsenal were winning games 4-5-0 particularly at home, very easily under Rene, much more fluid, creating a lot more chances. They even started this season like that against LCL and West Ham. And for reasons I honestly can't put my finger on, it stopped just like that. Like there was a 0-0 draw at United. And ever since then, it's felt like attacks feel like they're going uphill, you know, a little bit. It's almost like the pitch is tilted and we're trying to like push it uphill. And I really can't work out if that is just been worked out under Rene, whether it is a little bit, you know, some of her approach, which is very player-led. Perhaps, you know, you get a clean break after a manager. It's gone stale with Jonas. You get someone who does something very different. It's all very refreshing. And then you hit that 12-month point and it's like, actually, this isn't so refreshing anymore. So every manager, I think, has to answer that question. It's coming for Martin Ho. It's coming for Jeglerts as well in a few months. Like, what do you do when everyone works you out and you're not a breath of fresh air anymore? So I think there's a lot of little factors like that.
What you mentioned about the Champions League kind of being the end point for some of the group. And then I think in some ways it almost felt like coming too early for others, and then it's almost like in between. So you've got the older players where it felt like, okay, you're rubber stamping their great service for the club. Someone like Kim Little, who felt like she was deserving of that trophy, and that would have been the amazing way to kind of finish her career at Arsenal. But some of those younger players who, you know, this could be the first signs of what they could achieve with the club, but then that not following through with this season in terms of their impact on the pitch or the minutes they're getting. So I almost feel like it was like stuck in between those two factors, and no one, whether it's the coach, the squad, or the sort of leadership team, or the hierarchy, sort of the board leadership team, not the player leadership team, kind of knew where to go with it, because you're thinking, oh, well, some of these players actually delivered the goods, so how can we say to them, you can't be part of the next season's plans? But then you've got to think about those younger players coming through who were also part of that, and they're the next generation. How different do you think Sleggers' team is to Eidevall, whether that's not just personnel, but also in the way that they play? Because I feel like under Eidevall, Arsenal were a team that really wanted to thrive in transition. And I think Sleggers is someone who likes a bit more build-up, but actually we probably see Arsenal, like lots of teams, get more opportunities when they do have the space to exploit, whether that's using Olivia Smith the way that they can so well. I feel like even now it's hard to see what is the way that Sleggers really wants to play.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely a bit of that. Like, because tactically it's quite divergent from Jonas. I'd say it's quite Dutch. Even to the point that even a few months ago I was thinking, this sounds pejorative, it's not meant to be, like, why did Jonas keep hiring Rene? Because, like, she seems to have very, very different ideas. Maybe that's why.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe you could say we're trying to play Rene Sleggers football with Jonas Eidevall's players in some respect, or like Joe Montemoro's players. I actually think her style is closer to Joe Montemoro than it is to Jonas. And in that respect, there's still a lot of Joe's squad still there. But I do think there's an issue around identity, and I think it really has its roots in recruitment. And I think that's my big concern with Arsenal. Whether I really hope Rene is the person to take the squad forward. I've got a lot of time for her. I think she's a really, really good coach. I think Arsenal as a club has a responsibility to develop female coaching talent as well. And so all of it just felt really right to me.
Do you think it was too soon for her? Do you think it was too much of a jump?
What I think is the Arsenal job at the moment, just because of the age of the squad, so whatever about like stories about dressing room cliques and all of that, just the age of the squad means it's a rebuild job. That is the job of like the current Arsenal manager, and it's a big job because you're talking about really big players who maybe haven't, in WSL terms, haven't delivered, but in other, you know, in tournaments and cup competitions have really delivered, and delivered like the biggest trophy as well. And that's hard. It's like stuff is coming down the road where Arsenal are going to have to replace massive players like Kim Little, for example. That is going to be really difficult, and the recruitment has to be spot on for that. It really does. And you were talking about like the coming core of players. There's a core there who are not necessarily young, but like Daphne van Domselaar, Emily Fox, Alessia Russo, and it's like Chloe Kelly. Like, this is like the future leadership group coming down the tracks, basically. And it feels like Arsenal are still stuck in that kind of, like, there's a bit of inertia there. And I feel like someone has to make some potentially hard, unpopular decisions. And Renee, I know, because she said to me she doesn't like to get that involved in recruitment. I kind of think that's fair enough, but then you can't have a situation where players are bought and she's like, I will not use this player under any circumstances. Like, if you want to do that with recruitment, you have to work with what you're given, or you have to get more involved with recruitment. You can't have this kind of halfway house. So I think, like, what I think is the Arsenal job is a rebuild job. And I don't know where the inflection point is, whether it's Renee doesn't want to make hard decisions, or I'm not sure the alignment's there.
I think it's not just going to be one individual.
No.
It's going to be bringing like the right coach blended with the right backroom staff, blended with the right very senior executives who are then all plugged in together. And it's that disjointedness that I think has got Arsenal to this point where we're at now. And obviously, you know, you mentioned the dressing room unrest, and that was part of that Athletic piece that came out. But actually, a chunk of it also was about the more disjointedness behind the scenes and the fact that there has been changes at the very senior level, and there's, you know, often the power is kind of isolated to maybe not enough people and not enough decision making being shared around and insight and intelligence being shared. I also think it's something I think about a lot in sort of EFL terms is when you see a very good coach come in, a coach,
Yep.
who you see has the talent, the knowledge, the ability, but you need the kind of bad cop to go with them, the kind the slightly more vocal leader who you know has the control of the dressing room and the kind of status. And I think probably part of the fact that Renee's role was she was doing the IDP stuff and she had that great bond with the players, and she's also very young still. You know, she wasn't playing that long ago.
She's 1 year older than the captain. Which
is crazy. So
That's insane.
It's quite hard to have that separation of leadership. And I'm not trying to insinuate that they don't sort of like respect her, but that is really hard. It's the same when, I mean, look how well Frank Lampard's doing at Coventry, right? But when he came in at Chelsea, he was working with young players during that embargo where he had to inspire them, and they saw someone, oh, it's Frank Lampard. He wasn't that long out of playing. But then at that point, it becomes like, how do you actually long term maintain that control and show your ability as a coach as well as a leader? And I feel like Renee is someone who needs that alongside her. I've really noticed actually recently in the past couple of weeks, it's Aaron, isn't it, the main assistant?
Yeah.
When you see him on the sideline and when the broadcast or whatever, you know, comes to the bench, he's the most vocal person. He's right beside her. He's the one kind of doing the biggest shouting, kind of having the biggest influence in many ways. And she obviously looks to him a lot as her kind of like, you know, right-hand man. But it does feel like maybe there's not the right blend there of, I see her maybe as more of an assistant right now to someone who has that big, whoever that may be, you know. We had a couple of questions from people who want to ask you, Tim, like, who should be the next coach? And I think that's really hard to say because not only there's not a lot of great options out there, no offence to the pool,
no one
but
would
you know
have
what I
said
mean?
Renee
Like,
Slagers when
exactly, like lots of people are in a job, and it's hard to kind of magic that up out of thin air. But it does feel like whoever the next person is, they need to have almost that status coming in and that experience of, like you say, doing that sort of rebuild. And it's hard to know who that person is.
Yeah, I think I would be okay with it being Renee, but you've got to empower her because what should have happened in the summer and what I thought might happen is, like, she's won the Champions League. Her stock will never be higher in her whole career. Like, what a position that is for a young coach. You've gone into Arsenal, you've won that trophy, you've got a squad that's about 29 years old. Like, you'd think, not wrecking ball, but, you know, you'd think, I've got so much power and authority here to make this Renee Slagers squad playing Renee Slagers football. And it didn't happen for whatever reason. I think if it's going to be Renee, there needs to be like a strong, almost like Paul Green type, director of football. You don't want to do the agent stuff and the recruitment stuff. Fine, I will do that for you. You go out and coach on the pitch and all of that. But she's very into like devolving responsibility. That's why you see Aaron. Aaron coaches out of possession, which is why he's always up on his feet. He coaches the press. He coaches the defence. And I think all of that is fine. And if that's the model you want to go with it. Go all in and put someone behind her who's going to take those difficult, knotty decisions and, you know, do whatever else needs to be done. Otherwise, you probably need, and if you're not going to do that, you probably need a more alpha, forgive the gendered language, alpha coach who's going to, you know, I don't know, bring Jonas back for one season to do the kind of the messy...
To set fire to a lot of shit. Yeah, no,
and then,
it is that.
And then get rid of him and bring Renee back, basically.
Well, also the fact as well that after she won the Champions League, she only gets that 1 year deal, which optics-wise also kind of feels strange because it feels like a maybe, you know, not necessarily a long term.
And I understand that Arsenal wanted, you know, that there were talks about extending, because I thought it made sense to give her an 18-month deal. January, you don't want to give her 6 months, that's not enough. So I felt 18 months was, and that always felt to me, let's see what happens at the end of this season, then we review. Yeah. And obviously she wins the Champions League, so I don't think I'm breaking any great confidences by saying that, like, I think the club will was to extend her. I don't know why that hasn't happened yet. I don't know where that's coming from. The process of appointing her, you know, like she wins that game against Bayern Munich before Christmas and everyone leaves, myself included, like, yep, she's got the job, great. It's like 5 weeks before the ink is actually dry on the contract. And again, I don't have 2020 insight into why that took so long, such a slam dunk appointment that they almost kind of had to do at that stage and should have done. And we did the first 2 games after the winter break and she was still the interim. And it's like, my God, how long, why is this taking so long? And there are contracts as well. Players like Emily Fox, Daphne Van Domselaar, again, in the summer, very much told, yep, Arsenal want to extend these players, and it hasn't happened. And I don't really know why. I don't know. It feels...
Would you give her a new contract at the end of the season, Tim?
Only if they really throw their lot in with her and say, this is how we're going to do things, and we're going to have strong DOF kind of presence behind her, and this is the route we're going down. They have to commit to it if they're going to do that.
It is interesting because I do kind of wonder if winning the Champions League it's obviously not a bad thing for Arsenal because obviously it's like an amazing thing to happen. But if you kind of had a like Rawlsian veil of ignorance, like you didn't know what had happened, and then you had this team who are 2 points off second, they're going to be in the next round of the Champions League. They don't always look amazing, but sometimes things work, especially in like small portions of games. You know, you think of the sort of first half against Bayern, the second half against Chelsea. I think you kind of think, okay, like this is a team where, especially with a manager who's only been in that sort of role for a year, you're like, oh, maybe they're going somewhere. But I just wonder if that Champions League sort of hanging over it has made... And, you know, Arsenal are a team who have so much noise around them because they've got the biggest fan base. There are a lot of sort of people within the media who have history and backgrounds with Arsenal, which I think also increases the scrutiny around them. So it's a very noisy, I think, club to deal with anyway. And I just wonder if you, Tim, think that like the Champions League win, which was an amazing run, but was a run basically of like 3 or 4 games, has just created a level of expectation which was sort of unrealistic for Arsenal ever to be that much further forward at the start of the season.
Yeah, probably it has. Like, no one is kidding themselves that Arsenal were the best team in Europe last year. Like, it felt like, for the first time, maybe ever, in the Women's Champions League, actually, it felt like that happened. It's like, oh, it's not Lyon and Barca. It's not obviously the best team in Europe, which you see happen more in the men's game, I think. But I just think maybe maybe in the absolute long term, and I'm not saying I would trade Lisbon for any of this. I'm fine with 3 years of plodding along for that day. But maybe what we needed was like the Gareth Taylor Man City season, where it's like you've crashed and burned, you've finished fourth, you're not in the Champions League, you got a lot of 29-year-olds who've got 1 year left on their contract, and maybe for like the future rebuild of the squad, maybe we should have just let Jonas do the whole season.
Because it's interesting.
But maybe
you're talking
that season was the one when they didn't get out the qualifiers. That was the so-called crash and burn.
Because also you're talking about Rene having like so much power this summer, which I agree. But you know, Rene's also in a position where, say like Steph Catley, that's like one of the big decisions Rene makes, right? Is to play Catley as this left-sided centre back. You go and keep a clean sheet against Barcelona. So I think that feels hard to say that's, even though that's someone who I'd be like, that's probably someone you want to move on. Like, that does feel like a tricky decision to then go and make almost because of winning the Champions League. Whereas, as you say, if that whole season goes, then you're like, okay, well, Catley probably doesn't ever move from left back.
But I think that's a sign of her inexperience, because I think a coach with more experience backs themselves on what the future planning looks like, regardless of what you.
But it's funny,
it's
because
easier said than done.
Because I just think also, like, every manager, and this is, I guess, where the DOF element comes in, because every manager wants to win now. Because if you're a manager and you're not winning, you're the one who gets axed, right? So there's always going to be that tension. And, for all of sort of the inexperienced stuff, we call her Ruthless Rene on social media. She's clearly not fussed about there being players who, if she doesn't want to play, that she won't play them.
No, but
that's obviously not an issue.
No, but I would disagree, because now I think she's been forced to kind of backtrack, because we've seen certain players.
But look at even like Hines starting over McCabe, right? I would say
that's probably the biggest
That's
one.
an example. That feels like a Emma Hayes-esque, kind of kill your darlings. McCabe, maybe you've like pissed me off, like whatever. Like I don't trust you in game. Like hooking at halftime in Spurs. I can't trust you in this game, so you're coming off. I think that's the sign of a manager who like can make big decisions. But I think
there's
maybe also somewhere along that, and maybe that is against DOF saying, okay, Rene, you might really like X 29-year-old player, you might want to keep her going, but I'm telling you, we're not going to renew her.
Or maybe
we're
the other way
sell
around.
her. Yeah.
Maybe the other way around. Maybe Rene doesn't like X 29-year-old player.
But there's no one who's been signed who is like an adequate replacement.
For the sake of the team.
So you keep on. Yeah. And because there's like tensions within all this stuff. Like, we're talking about players you might want to move on from and you might not want to move on from. But like, if you were just looking at an Arsenal squad, the player you'd be like, oh, why is she still playing? It's probably like Kim Little because of age. But I'm like, but when she plays, she's one of Arsenal's best players. So it's not a simple thing just to say you move on from this player.
No, if it's going to negatively impact the team,
you need that person within, whether it's the hierarchy, whether it's the manager, who's gonna be sort of sensitive and aware. And I guess the one thing I'll add as well is my worry for Arsenal within all of this is it's what you're saying about it now needs to be perfect. It feels.
And it's all going to happen at once.
Yeah.
And not just because of age, because of contracts. Like next summer for Arsenal, it's going to be unavoidably huge. Unavoidably. And part of that is because they should have done the work a bit more incrementally. And they kind of paused during this summer just gone. And
also we have the Euros, and that's always then difficult when you're sort of...
And it's probably going to be a situation where you've got like 4 or 5 players who are big players who are out of contract, and we're going to have to replace them all at the same time, which is not great work when you can... And it doesn't have to be personal about players. Like, it doesn't have to be, I don't like you, or you're rubbish now, or whatever. It's just like, look, this is just...
It's football as well.
We've got loads of players who are coming into their 30s, and we've got to parcel that work out a little bit. Yeah,
so we've got... who's out of contract? McCabe, Mead.
I believe Beth Mead, Caitlin
Ford, Steph Catley as well.
I think Steph Catley,
and maybe Zinsberger, actually, because I think she did a short-term renewal.
I mean,
but
that's
probably
that's
probably the least pressing one anyway. If Van Dobsler can come back and stay fit. I also think, Jessy, on your point, I agree with you. I think the expectation shift was huge. The expectation versus reality thing. We spoke about that at the start of the season of like, actually realistically, when you take Arsenal in the WSL and where their WSL title rivals are, where do they fit in that long-term progression planning? I think that's a big one. And then again, you can also only move the players on when the recruitment's right, because you've got someone coming in to replace them. And I think Arsenal have been stuck on this, bringing people in, young players who want to play, who are really talented and sort of fighting people to sign them, not playing them, and then they end up leaving because they're not getting minutes. So it's such a fine balance between...
Inspired by Kathy Cool's appearance at Stamford Bridge last night.
It's that is such balance, and that is the challenge of running a big football club. And I think, Chelsea probably are the ultimate as this, because they've, under Hayes and Bonpastor, they've managed to make a bloated squad work, and ruthlessly. I mean, Emma Hayes ruthlessly move people on when they are basically dead.
Yeah, and I think, Chelsea, and some people on social media will criticise this. I think you see this in the men's game as well. This is just the way that football is going and is viewed. But what you do is you go out and you go, I want her. And then you've got so many of them that it doesn't matter if only two of them sort of really work out. And then you say, look at Melis Mpome. Chelsea have her in for a year. They take a look at her. Doesn't really work out. She's on to Brighton, And it's just it's quick. And I think that's some of Arsenal's problem with younger players. Hasn't been that it hasn't worked out. It's that it's dragged on. And you talk about Chelsea's bloated squad. Arsenal also have a very big squad. But it's just felt like that there are players who sit there for a while who no one wants to use, and then you're like, well, you're wasting that space because the squads are quite tight. You're wasting that space on someone who you're never going to use, but when you could have someone who, it kind of comes back to the rotation thing, you could be switching in and then everyone will be complaining that you're switching in the middle all the time.
Basically, what complaints do you want more? That's the life of a football manager. That is football. Tim, let's get into some questions that people have sent through. Some of them are very nice and then less stressful. Flops, classic flops. Best Champions League away day in terms of food and drink.
Yeah, this is a difficult one because,
I love this. This is the most... We're really putting Tim in the spotlight. Away day, food and drink.
Because I've been doing the men's Champions League away games for about 25 years, there aren't many places I haven't been.
Yeah.
Copenhagen is one place I've been for the women's Champions League that I've not been for the men's. And we played Kurga a few years ago, and I went with a group of friends because it was during a men's international break. And they went into this nice kind of microbrewery, chalkboard behind the bar, numbers 1 to 40. And I had to go to Jonas's press conference. And they just said, ask Jonas, after the press conference, obviously not during, to pick a number between 1 and 40. And that would correspond with the beer that they would buy. And he picked a number, and whatever it was the 8% beer.
Whoa.
So Jonas Eiderval was indirectly responsible for a very, very messy night in Copenhagen.
And expensive. Denmark's not cheap.
Yeah,
I
imagine
8% in Denmark.
Beer in Denmark is very expensive.
I've never been to the San Siro, but when people post their pictures of that delicious pizza, no, it looks good. The pizza, the food looks good there. I know as a stadium experience, it's not great because it's so old-fashioned and kind of... dilapidated, but the pizza, I will say, the Italian stadium food experience looked quite enticing.
I've been there 4 times. I'm going again next month. The whole thing about the San Siro being knocked down, they can get me to do that for free. It's one of the most horrible grounds in the world. And the toilet situation...
Oh, yeah, it's famously quite
bleak.
It's
like something out of Midnight Express, to be honest.
Rob has asked, best goal you've seen scored against Arsenal.
There was an overhead kick from the edge of the box by a Tabina Potsdam player in 2012, and I can't remember her name, but it was extraordinary, and there was no footage of it. But probably the best one, I used to do these little kind of 2-sentence previews for Arsenal.com, before the kind of explosion of the WSL, and people really knew this stuff, and we played Reading. And I was like, Farrah Williams on set pieces. There'd be no need to do this now. People would know that. But it's like, yeah, Farrah Williams for Reading on set pieces, really good. She scored straight from centre.
Actually, yeah, I remember that game.
Yeah, there's almost like CCTV footage of it in the Conti Cup. And I was thinking I wasn't thinking of centre. I was thinking of free kicks and corners. But yeah,
she had a
Farrah
couple
Williams,
of those. She did that for
centre.
Liverpool as well, I think, at one point.
Yeah,
I mean, she was a ridiculous player. Garden on the Roof, love this username. If Santa could bring you one player to Arsenal from any club, who would it be?
Oh my God, probably Temwa Chewinga.
Wow, I love that.
Arsenal, Jonas wanted to sign her but couldn't, I believe, for work permit reasons. But I mean, first of all, like, amazing player, but also I think something and someone Arsenal could really, really do with, actually.
And then Tina has asked, if you could have one past Arsenal player join this squad in their peak, who would it be? And she's added, it can't be Rafa or Kelly Smith.
Marianne Spacey. Very much where my love affair with Arsenal ladies began in the mid-90s, but either as a 10 or a 9, probably as a 10 in this team because there's probably space there. She was like an alien. You know, when you watch those players, a bit like kind of peak Vivian Miedema, probably a bit like Kelly Smith or peak Marta, where you're just like, this player is, even in a really good team, is just obviously so much better than everyone else. That's what Marianne Spacey was like. And yeah, possibly pound for pound Arsenal's best ever player.
Wow, love it. Tim, thanks so much for coming on. It's great to have you. I'm sure we'll get you on again. And lots of people have lots of questions, I'm sure, off the back of this. Will you be at the Everton game this weekend?
Yeah, it's going to be a real marathon, actually, because we kick off at Goodison Park midday on Saturday, and then the men kick off at 8 p.m. at the Emirates. So
are you going to make it back?
Yeah, Avanti willing. Yeah, so I'm on a 6:30 a.m. train to Liverpool, and then I'm coming back, and I'm due into Euston about 6 p.m. So let's make
you got some buffer.
7:30 probably, knowing Avanti, if at all. And then I'll go straight to that, and it will be close to a 24-hour thing, basically. So yeah.
Wow, I'm impressed. The things you do to bring Arsenal fans the coverage, Tim. Jessy, are you going to be at Brighton?
I'm thinking about it. I've not made a decision yet. It's the Parker Humphreys Christmas tree decorating, but I haven't missed Brighton away for about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I think. It's a kind of love-hate relationship you have with that
It is
game.
a love-hate relationship, yeah. But in recent years we've been better. I'm just still cursed from one game. I think it was the first time I ever did it. Anyway, we drew 1-1 and Adelina Engman, if anyone remembers her, equalised for us.
Yeah, but there was another game. Oh no, that was at Kings Meadow, wasn't it?
That's when we lost to them. The Carly Telford game.
Yeah. Well, we'll of course be talking about all of that on Monday. We'll see you then.